I'm Linda Martinez. I'm the Deputy Mayor for Development in the City of St. Louis, and I'll have to fill out one of these forms, I guess. The application was a very straightforward document. It was about 30 pages long. It was described our airport in detail, and in Plavins and airlines, and it was it was a reservation of a place in line, as the director had indicated. There are 10 slots that were available nationwide, and it was just to say we'd like to be one of the slots. And about 30 days later, the federal government approved that a slot, a place in line. In terms of the next steps, we were really at beginning the next steps. There was a request for proposals for consulting services issued
A week and a half ago?
maybe?
Yes.
10 days ago. And applications are due on October 20th. And what we're looking for is a team of people, lawyers, accountants, financial advisors, environmental people, title companies, the whole panoply of advisors to help us understand our airport and whether or not it would be a suitable candidate for long-term lease. And then also people who know the world of investors and would this be an attractive investment, and in communications with potential investors. In terms of the process, we're really looking for that team. We've done a lot of analysis about what's been done, the 2 attempts that were done for privatizing the Midway Airport, what was done in Stewart, what's being done in Westchester, what's being done in Kansas City. And also, while we don't have a lot of fully privatized airports in the United States, we do have a lot of pieces of operations of airports that have been privatized, parking or concessions or whatever. And so and then you also look at other infrastructure projects. People have privatized roads and old bridges and things like that. So you have to look at analogies in other areas, but this is an exploration. There's no predetermined outcome on this, and we're at the step of looking for a team of people, a comprehensive team to help us understand the process and the potential.
Right, and that's why I had the questions and needed to know the application process and what was taking place now and what had taken place. In that, I did invite Grove, Missouri, which was I guess they were the ones that formally applied or pulled together the. Okay, so what exactly did Grove, Missouri do in order to aid those efforts to apply?
They helped us with a legal team that had experience with privatization. From Europe mostly, they had that experience, and other privatization of infrastructure, not airports in the United States, and helped us with legal advice, working with our city councilor's office. And like Rhonda said, we weren't around in March. We were involved in that process, but like I said, it was a very straightforward application. It wasn't very detailed. It didn't, again, like I said, it was reserving a place in line. It was about 30 pages. It's a public document. We could provide it to you if you'd be interested in stuff. But it's mostly a description of the airport.
Right.
I would.
Expression of an interest,
Sure, I'd love to have a copy of that. 30 pages doesn't sound that simple to me, but I guess if you have a legal team of experts that had dealt with privatization of other public assets in the past, they would have the ability to do so. I guess point of contention for me is that we had to use an outside entity in order to do it because we either didn't have the expertise or we may not have had the financing to do so, which I would have asked them, roughly what the cost was in providing that counsel and expertise in doing that. And the reason I asked that is because the city has certain provisions in place to make sure that there's access for minority and women-owned businesses to be able to do certain things. And if we open the door to allowing outside entities because they have the expertise or they have the finances where we don't, then it potentially gives them a leg up because as we know now, Grove, Missouri will be competing for the RFP. And that's why they're not here today. I did invite them. I provided the language, and they specifically stated that they could have you come with them, as well as their legal counsel. And I said, that's fine. I said, I don't want to ask any question that would potentially harm their bid, but I needed to know more about the application process, what they actually did, and the amount spent. You don't happen to know how much money or time or resources were invested into assisting with the application.
I do not know that, and the only thing I know is that the contract that was signed between the City of St. Louis City Councilor's Office and the Grow Missouri team provided that it would be at no expense to the City of St. Louis unless and until something happened with the privatization in the future. And that's one of the reasons why we're bidding now, is to make sure that we've got a team that can be approved to be reimbursed should we make a decision as a community to go forward with this transaction. But you said a lot of things, and I'd like to address some of these.
Go ahead.
Does the City of St. Louis have the expertise to undertake this review by themselves? And the answer is, this is very similar to doing a bond transaction. The Comptroller's Office does that. The airport recently did a bond financing, and at that time they did a search for an underwriter and a team of underwriters. They did a search for a bond counsels, and they did a search for financial advisors, and had two financial advisors, and had people that were involved in being the underwriters counsel in order to do the disclosure for the bond transactions. In each of those circumstances, we had, people from the Comptroller's Office and the Budget Department and the airport who had the wherewithal to work with those experts in the private sector, but they didn't have this very specific abilities to be the bond counsel or to be the underwriters counsel or to be able to find people to purchase the bonds. So having an outside team of people working with the City of St. Louis, an outside team of experts working with the city, is something we do every day when we want people to come in and be, provide services on computers. We do bids for those kinds, because we want an expert who knows and has the wherewithal to do a tailored job, quickly and expertly. But every time we bid for those positions, all of our inclusionary requirements are set forth in there with regard to wages and minority participation and women-owned business participation, part and parcel of every kind of proposal, request for proposals. This one is no different. The RFP that we issued must meet all of the city's requirements for inclusion and for participation by minority and women-owned businesses, and addressing things like city workers and living wages.
And to add on to that, from a federal perspective, because as an enterprise fund of the City of St. Louis, we obviously receive federal funding for the airport. So we're bound by all the federal guidelines. And not for the application process itself, I mean, the city can submit that, but if you go forward and you actually do enter into an agreement, if that were to happen, you are bound by the same federal requirements, which has ACDBE for concessions at your airport, and it's also got DBE participants if you've got airfield work or anything that you're receiving federal fund on. So that never changes, even if this process were to go through and be completed and a new operator came on board, they are bound under the FAA privatization program to meet all those federal requirements. You cannot waive those.
And the city wouldn't waive its requirements as well.
Sure.
And we're also looking for other issues beyond just those minimum standards, because we want to make sure this is the best thing for the citizens of the City of St. Louis and for the flying public and for the region. The airport is, while it's technically an asset that's owned by the City of St. Louis, it serves mostly people who don't live in the City of St. Louis. So we have to make sure that this has a positive impact on the flying public, and Ron will, help us make sure we have operating standards that are set out that make sure that we address that, and also what we possibly, other options that maybe we could be able to finance on our own. And then also just making sure that should we go that direction, what would be a thoughtful way to expend any proceeds of as a result of the long-term lease. Obviously, we do want to talk to the budget department. We want to talk to people who are involved in the capital needs for the City of St. Louis. What are we going to do that has the most impact, positive impact on our community? And so that would be involved. There would be a lot of involvement, community engagement, and looking forward to having those conversations. It might have a positive impact on the credit rating of the City of St. Louis, which could help us with other borrowings if we wanted to refinance bonds for the police station or refinance our fire department equipment. If we could get a positive rating modification as a result of this, it would be worth considering. Doesn't mean it's a predetermined outcome, but here we are really at the beginning of a process, and we're looking forward to learning about what might happen, and if it really is both good for the flying public and good for the city of St. Louis, then it may be something that the Board of Aldermen and the Board of Esterman and portion of it would consider.
Sure. Go ahead, Representative Stacy.
Just wondered, does this have any bearing on maybe a regional kind of authority? In other words, would privatization include the conversation that might involve a
Typically, if you have an operator that does the lease, they are the authority in that, so that would normally be how they would be set up. So I don't know that there would be a region. Today, we have an airport commission, and that obviously is a regional authority. So we have representatives from St. Louis County, we have representative from St. Charles, St. Clair, and the city of St. Louis. So that's a 17-person board. There is one vacancy right now, but that's a regional board, and obviously they too would be a part of looking into this process as we move forward into the next steps. So I think from that perspective, if you're talking about an operator coming in that would look at a long-term lease, there wouldn't be the anticipation that there would be a regional authority. So that would be a different process.
Representative Smith, proceed.
I guess kind of piggybacking on that and add some other, so that means like essentially if it was privatized, you all would go away.
Well, not necessarily, no. So the city would continue to own the lease. Any entity that would bid on this process would be the operator of the airport, meaning they would come in. Now, how you set out that specifics, so from an employee perspective, for instance, not speaking outside of my role, but, there's about 550 employees that work directly for me through the city of St. Louis. However you write your specs for the RFP, if one is released to look for an operator, those are things that would go into that to be very specific about the retention of those employees or how that would look. So those are all things that are part of the process as you go on. So when you have an operator that comes into a large airport, especially if you talk about the rank and file employees, they need those employees. They need their expertise. They still have to run an airport day to day, so they need that expertise. The thought processes would be that, the majority of all of those employees would move over to it, but there is somehow you write the RFP, and that's something that we would, obviously, as the airport director, I would ask that, we look at that as a very specific piece of the RFP.
Okay.
There's something that's called the operating standards that
Right.
Ron is referencing here. And it would be a very detailed document about what is going to happen to the flying experience. And what's going to happen to the economic development experience. There's land that the airport controls, adjoining the airport. And we'd want to make sure that the operator thinks about how do we develop that in order to have the largest economic impact. How much do we expect them to expend in terms of investment in that property and investing in trying to make that both the inside the airport experience and outside the airport experience best it can be. These operating specs are going to be very detailed. It's not going to change what's going to happen
Right.
in the airfield. It's not going to change the stay experience. And those people are still going to be employed at the airport. But it's a question about if, the city of St. Louis doesn't have the financial wherewithal to do certain things that could help change the flying experience, what could a lessee do in that circumstance? But operating standards are going to be a very important part. And then going back to what Rhonda was saying, we have this institutional memory. We have 550 people who know this airport in and out and have made it the great airport that it is. I can't see somebody else coming in and saying, we're going to start from scratch, but we're going to have standards about inclusion. We're going to have standards about employment in these operating standards that will be, what we include in the request for qualifications and the request for proposals for a potential lessee, potential investor in the airport.
Okay, so you answered, I had some other questions down here because I was concerned
Go
about.
ahead. That's what I always do. I jump in and
Yeah,
apologize.
no, it's fine, it's fine. It makes it more efficient because I was concerned about security. I know right now we've got a highly trained force that is there operating, and we have a highly skilled fire service department that operates at the airport too. And so I guess with privatization, so here's another thing. So I'm gonna just throw this one out here. Will this drive up landing fees, therefore driving up the cost of a ticket for someone to fly? Because I fly quite frequently
Yeah.
as other
Thank
people.
you. We appreciate that.
do
So
too.
there's two things to that. We have continued to drive landing fees down right now, and that is one of the reasons that the airlines have been growing here, is because they have
Right.
continued to see their costs come down. I can tell you that as part of this process, the airlines have a very big role in this process, and they ultimately have a 65% vote, meaning that 65% of the employments and 65% of the operations, the airlines have to have that vote at the table. So for the airlines, they're going to want to make sure that when an RFQ or an RFP is released, it meets their standards as well. And what their standards means is that I want our cost to be capped at this, I want this, and I want this. So they become also a part of the process. And from their perspective, and that is one thing that I will say, that the FAA process puts safeguards in there. That's the reason the airlines have a voice and a say-so, because they're not going to agree to say, my cost can go to here, that's okay with me. They're going to want to ensure that their costs are on the same level and the forecasted level that they're currently experiencing. So they'll have that'll be protections that they would ask to be put in the RFP, so they'll have a voice at the table as well.
Okay, and with this process, and I know you went through the application process, I'm assuming at any point, we can just kind of withdraw the application. And ultimately, who makes the decision? Does this go back to a vote of the people, or the boards of St. Louis City and St. Louis County on if we choose to take privatization forward? I'm always kind of weary when you've got something that has been kind of created through taxpayer dollars, and then it's like, hey, you all, have a run at it, have a run at it, and make sure that those dollars are spent well. But ultimately, like, who will make the decision on if, the thumbs up or thumbs down decision on it?
It will be a multifaceted process. As Rhonda mentioned, 65% of the airlines, as well as airlines representing 65% of the employments, have to approve this process. And they'll enter into something that's referred to as an airline user. And that will be a fundamental document, probably negotiated sooner rather than later, that will help us understand what the airlines want. And I don't know, but if there's something that we could do at the airport that would make baggage claim processing more efficient for the airlines and maybe save them some operating costs, they would want to say, please make that part of what you have, require the investor to do, so that we can reduce our operating costs and reduce our prices or whatever. But so that you have the airline approval. But at the governmental level, we have two major local government bodies that are voted in by the people of the city of St. Louis. That is specifically, the Board of Aldermen would have to approve this. You'd have to have the majority of, and maybe 2/3, I think it's probably just the majority of the Board of Aldermen approve it. And then you'd have to have 2 out of 3 members of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment approve it. All elected officials representing the city of St. Louis. It also has to be approved by the FAA. You can't do this without their approval. They're going to sign off on every element of what's going on. And that's not just what's going on inside the airport, but they're also going to have a big say in what they think the city of St. Louis should do with any monies that might be generated through the long-term lease of the airport. They, as a organization, are part of the Department of Transportation, and their emphasis is capital improvements. They don't want to take these kind of proceeds and just have better trash service, better lighting. They want to see real capital improvements in the city. And so on a parallel basis to looking at the expiration of the lease, we have to make sure that the citizens, the city and the region say, this is what we think that the funds should be applied to. We'll have financial advisory teams that will help us look at, again, our long-term capital needs and what can we do that would help the citizens and the region. Because if you think about it, we've got approximately 100,000 workers in downtown St. Louis. We've got a lot of workers around the medical center campus. We've got workers throughout the city of St. Louis. What do we do with the funds that changes the revenue stream, the worker experience, and most importantly, the residents' experience?
Okay.
Would be part and parcel. I can't see the Board of Aldermen or the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, making these kinds of decisions without really thinking what's going to change in terms of the rating and what's the thoughtful way to apply the funds.
All right, great. And I know there's a lot of science. Thank you for that, dealing with it. As someone who, I don't live in a city, but I live in the path of many airplanes. A lot of the municipalities that I represent, I believe there was programs set up before that helped some of them get different windows in
Oh,
the
the noise
house to
abatement
help
program.
with noise abatement. Because I'm thinking, hey, if this goes and it's a great thing, it works out to all parties involved. If programs like that, and I might be looking forward to the future, but ensuring that programs like that are kept in place if there's increased traffic at the airport, because it does impact the quality of life of 38,000 residents that I represent, along with your 38, along the flight path of the airport. So,
Well, the one good piece, I think, is that the FAA operating standards don't change. We operate under what we call a 139 FAR certificate. That doesn't change. So whatever operator, if there were to be one that would come in and operate the airport, they have to operate under that same certificate. The other piece that the FAA states is that you cannot abrogate any union contract that you have. So at the airport, of those 550 employees that I talked about, we obviously have some that fall under a union. So those particular contracts have to stay in place through an FAA process.
Can't be changed.
okay, well, thank you all. And I think you said San Juan was the only one that's privatized now in the U.S.?
There was a Stewart Airport that
Right.
was privatized and then became unprivatized. Midway did two privatization analysis. First time they did it, what happened to be 2008, and they selected a winning bid. The winning bidder
Pulled out.
deposited $120 million into an account at the city of Chicago. Then, due to the recession, was unable to complete their financing. The Chicago people kept $120 million. Second time they did it, they only had, I think they got down to
One
just
bid.
one, and they decided it really wasn't in their financial best. They also had an unfortunate experience between two privatizations with privatizing their parking meters, and I think that had an impact
Okay.
on
But San Juan is the only one that's fully.
Yes.
And I just say that because given what's happening in San Juan and the rest of Puerto Rico now, it'd be interesting to see kind of the private company's response and if they're able to kind of do what they need to do in order to.
I think there's a lot of eyes on that, obviously. I mean, the whole country's devastated right now, so it would be tough for anyone, whether you're a private operator or whether you're still a city-owned operating of that airport. It would be tough for anyone, but I think there's a lot of eyes watching to see what an outside operator will do with that.
You're right, I heard the NPR story this morning, and
Yeah.
I was listening with that exact ear. They got the radar back, or some of the radar back online, so they could get more emplacements, and, but, big power problems, still, water problems.
Thank you. I don't mean,
Our prayers go to them.
didn't mean to hog too much time, but.
Oh, you're a good representative. I appreciate you being a member of this committee. Speaking on that, and I mean, that was a valid point to bring up, how the private operator is able to do whatever is necessary in the recovery efforts or just in getting back online. Whereas the city, as the owner of the airport, may have, and I guess the comptroller's office may have to answer, the city would have the ability to get, I'm assuming, some bonding authority to either repair some things that insurance doesn't cover or to, basically make the airport whole again if it were damaged. We haven't had a situation as bad. We've had situations when that changes and it goes to a private operator, who would be able to step in, or would the city still be able to step in and help, or would that not be permitted because of the changing nature of the relationship?
Well, first, there's two things. So we are an enterprise fund of the city of St. Louis, and what that means is that we operate totally independent off of user fees, federal grants, and then non-aeronautical revenues that we generate.
Okay.
So there is no money from the city of St. Louis that comes into the airport today. So in the case of the tornado, we, the airport, did have an independent insurance policy, and we had a very good policy, so that covered those costs. Had that not covered those costs, then we would have used, we would have either taken additional bond money, and then that goes back into the rates and charges of your airline.
So you have an independent bonding ability just as the enterprise fund?
Yes, we do it through the comptroller's office, and certainly the comptroller's office leads all the bond sales and any refundings that we do, but we do them as an independent, from the city of St. Louis from that perspective. We do them as an enterprise fund. And all of that money then comes back to the airport. And as a result, as I said, we have two independent budgets, although we fall, for city approval under the budget, but an enterprise fund does operate independent.
And in terms of the proceeds from the actual, I guess, leasing of the airport potentially, those funds would not go to you, or would they be split between you and the city, or do they just all go to the
No,
city?
I'm not
as
gonna take them personally, no.
Of course. Do they go straight to the airport and it's enterprise fund?
Right.
Or is that something that only goes to the city, or is there a sharing mechanism for
I think
the?
that's part of the
Part of the
process,
process,
yeah.
analyze, we'll have a consulting team that will help us think about the best application of those funds, so that's 12, 18 months down the road.
Gotcha. Okay, so 12 to 18 before we actually get to the process of doing the consulting phase of this to go to the next level?
Well, we're gonna start, hopefully, the consulting phase in early November.
Okay.
The proposals are due on October 20th, and we'll have a contract soon thereafter. But, there'll be, financial analysis of that, and, as you can imagine, there's a balancing. There's some people in the privatization have taken all their money up front and then gotten very little on an ongoing basis. The best advice that we've heard is some kind of balance between the two. Pay off all the debt upfront, have a certain amount of, upfront capital, but then having a larger amount on an ongoing basis. Currently, as a legacy airport, the city of St. Louis is only able to get $6 million a year from the airport. We could have a situation where it'd be a certain percentage of the revenue or something like that, which we would probably anticipate would be a higher amount than that. But those kinds of things are part of the evaluation process that we'll be undertaking over the next 12 months.
Sure, and I guess the process of putting out the RFP and then the selection, that will all happen in-house with the city of St. Louis.
With the selecting the advisory team, thereafter, that advisory team will draft up two different requests for proposals and qualifications. First, there'll be a look at the market of who might be a potential investor and talking to those investor teams, and there'll be a request for what they call a request for qualifications, and so we'll ask for teams of people to make proposals about what they would do if they became the investor, the lessee in the airport. Then that team will be narrowed. Those people who respond to the request for qualifications will be narrowed down, and that group will be asked to make an actual final proposal, and that's what would go forward. That's an iterative process that will move forward over a 12, 15 days time frame.
Sure. So going back to the application piece in terms of how the application was done and there was no money paid up front, but there is a provision that if the application moves forward, that the entity that helped would be able to get something. Could you speak to that? I'm trying to see exactly when, I guess, the funds kick in, what level of funds would be possible, and what else is attached to them receiving those funds.
It's probably a better question for.
At this point in time, the request for proposals for the financial advisor team basically says that we would like this to be done at no cost to the city on a current basis, and it would only be paid from any proceeds if the city decides to move action.
Oh, sure. So
that on what we're talking about currently. As to the initial application process, we do not have a number, and that arrangement was set forth before, but it would be, to the extent we could get it paid for out of the proceeds, it would be addressed at that, out of those proceeds. So make that part of the analysis process over the next 12 to 18 months.
So there's no cap on the amount that that Grove, Missouri would be able to receive, and there's no idea of what the amount would be if and when we move forward.
Actually, the request for proposals that we send out, we've asked for detailed information on what the cost will be, and it will be put into the contract. You're just asking us before we have the information. That's all.
Gotcha, but we did at least move into allowing them to assist and provide the expertise without,
Application, yes.
for the application, without knowing what the number would be and what would ultimately come out of the proceeds from privatizing the airport.
Well, my understanding from that was Grove, Missouri, in working with the prior mayor, said that they would fund that process. If nothing ever happened beyond that, those costs just stay at Grow Missouri. If down the road you got to a process and you entered into an RFP and you entered into an operator lease, then the cost that Grow Missouri spent to hire that team to put together the application would be recouped through the operator. So, but I don't know if there was a cap on that amount or not, quite honestly.
And I don't know why again, it was before, we weren't involved in the process.
Right, which is why I wanted them here. So the costs are just the cost, but it's not that they will be able to recoup the cost plus
No.
interest or any other
It
thing.
was just the cost, and
It's
they
just-
cannot be an operator. I mean, it made it very clear in the application that they, being Grow Missouri, and the team that they engaged to put the application process together, could not bid as an operator down the road.
As an operator, but they can bid as a part of the consulting team, which is why they're going after RFP, correct?
Well, there's two different consulting. So there's the consulting for the application, which was the initial 30, 45-day process, and then there's the consulting for the entire request for qualifications, proposal, and evaluation of what the city might use the funds for, community engagement and all that. I fully anticipate that the comptroller's office and the president's office and the mayor's office will expect that the contract with the advisory team will have caps in it and will have dollar amounts and on a written agreement that's we just haven't gotten the proposal, getting us early in the process.
Gotcha. So the reason for my line of question is specifically to see, since we do have the provisions that allow for minority participation and inclusion, in that Grow Missouri is not a minority entity. Even in them going after or doing the work that they did to put you all in a position to do this, there was an opportunity, whether it be, especially since it was at no cost to the city, to put someone along there along the process to at least learn from it, because once you have experience, given that there are at least 8 to 9 other potential opportunities, we could have expanded, the minority pool of expertise as opposed to not in this case. And yes, that's only the beginning part, but off of that beginning part, if other entities were looking to privatize, that would have been experience that wouldn't have been had. And if that could have actually made them more competitive in trying to secure that, one, the minority business would have gotten more business, and they likely would have brought another minority over, but we didn't follow that, so we cut out an opportunity for minorities again.
But it is going forward. It's in the current RFP on the street.
Sure, and so the point in that even is that we tend to do things because we're trying to make things happen. And when we cut people out at the beginning and then we put them in on the back end, it still robs us of an opportunity to gain. And though this is loosely related, what I'm pointing to is that we did the same thing when we tried to keep the Rams here. The actual Regional Sports Authority, I specifically in urban issues asked the question, I said, did we follow the rules and guidelines that we had in place for the minorities? And the executive director he actually stated, he said, yes, we did, but we were trying to keep the team. And I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I wouldn't even, have advised you to say that. But yet again, we do it again in this. So that's the second time. And I get that the city may be in a financial situation or they're exploring opportunities to, shore up the budget and things of that nature. But we have to be intentional about making sure that every opportunity is extended to the people that we're trying to help. If we rob them of an opportunity, even if we do it on the back end, we've done more of a disservice than, putting them in on the back end. So.
And I understand your point, and it's a very thoughtful point. From what I can tell, the application process was very straightforward. Anybody could get a copy of the application and replicate it in another transaction. The process that we're talking about now, compared to that, this is what's gone wrong so far. I can't even put arms wide enough to describe what we're talking about for the next part.
Right, except that it was still an opportunity, and in that opportunity, working along for whatever the process was, whether it be 45 days, that's 45 days of opportunity of relationship building to set you up to be able to work with those entities in the future, which only puts you more, at least in the fold of being able to operate in that manner. So if you don't look at it from that standpoint, you can try to correct after, but you've already harmed the parties on the front end. Does anyone questions? The other piece in bringing up, and I'll be brief in this one, in the process, what is it, the operating standards agreement, you spoke to how there is property owned, I guess by the enterprise fund or operating entity, and you hope that they would think to do certain things. What I'm hoping is that this actually scares me to a certain extent, in that because they're looking to profit off of the investment made. And in that, we could potentially harm the communities that are around the airport because they may need to expand more than what we've already expanded. What that does to me as the representative for the airport area is it takes more people out of the district. The district goes back, decades, and some of those people we have lost in the prior expansion and airport buyout, and then we went the other way. So I'd like to know what safeguards are in place or what safeguards we're thinking about before we get to creating that operating standard agreement and updating it to put out the request for the operator, if we get to that point, to protect the communities that are there so that the private entity doesn't operate just solely for profit, but my community can't stand any more damage. We can't stand to lose anyone else because North County as a whole has been devastated by the loss of several industries or entities as well, but we've also lost people. Kinlock, which is right next to the airport, which has its history going all the way back to Kinlock Airfield and the connections and such, and even with the Cartwright brothers, storing their plane somewhere around, if I'm recalling correctly. But we've lost a lot of that. And the land, it was demolished, and now it's a thriving North Park right now. But if I could have the people and the community that made it the first and the oldest African-American incorporated municipality in Missouri, I'd give up all of that just to have that, because that legacy, though it still exists today, it's been robbed of the continued legacy building opportunity because we wanted to expand the airport. So now we may find ourselves in that situation again.
Well, I think there's two things. We have one of the largest airfields in the country. So at our capacity right now, we're operating at about 42% of the capacity of the airport. No matter what scenario you bring forward, I don't see that we would need to enlarge our airfield ever. So I think we're ample there, even looking decades into the future. The other piece about that, if you looked kind of down the road into the future, the FAA also has a very dedicated process, if you want to call it, as to how you use the land that you currently own at an airport. That would not change under an operator agreement. So if you're going to do anything that's non-aeronautical, so if we have a piece of property that we own where you wanted to put, say, a warehouse on it, maybe an Amazon warehouse, something of that nature, you actually have to get the FAA approval to do something like that. The FAA has to take into what does it, one, do for the airport, what does it do for the surrounding communities, and it has to meet all of their guidelines. So there is protection, no matter whether we stay as we are today or whether you move over to an independent operator that's a for-profit, those things are in there. I think the other piece that you look at is going forward is you would determine with that operator beforehand what types of things you would want out of that land development as well. So, that's a piece of the RFP, and that's a piece of what you would come to agreement to. But you're not going to take, as large of an airport as we have, I honestly, as an airport director, can't ever see us expanding beyond the footprint of the existing land that we own today.
Sure. So I guess the question, just briefly, would be, is there the possibility of acquiring additional land to enlarge the footprint because they see additional opportunity to build around that and create something different? And then secondly, I guess, how much land do we currently control now that is being unused by the airport?
We own about 4,100 acres. So a little over 2,000 of that is within the airport perimeter fence, meaning our terminal space, our airfield space, and the perimeter, if you want to call it almost a magical fence around that. It's about 2,000. So we have about 2,000 acres outside of that. Some of that land is developed. We've already done some development of that, but you have pockets, and it's kind of spread out. So there are some pieces that are 5 acres here. There may be a contiguous spot that's 300 acres. So you have a lot of different pieces to that.
The other thing to think about is that because this land is airport and technically the city of St. Louis within the county, we don't have any wherewithal to affect the regulations of Ferguson. So any expansion outside of those 4,000 plus acres would be subject to the jurisdiction of municipalities that adjoin the airport. And we're not preemptively saying Hazelwood has to give us extra property. It's just not, that's, they.
Sure, at this point.
And then we're controlled by those jurisdictions.
Right, so the problem with that is that at this point, that doesn't hurt us going forward. Hopefully, in the past, it's hurt us in that we didn't have people that were at least utilizing the committee and their positions to ensure that we protected those communities, on the front end. All I can do now is try to protect my community from additional harm, and that's what I'm attempting to do, so, but.
And that's one of the reasons why community engagement is, not just the city of St. Louis, it's the entire region.
Sure.
That's a big part of what we're talking about over the next 12, 18 months.
Definitely, I appreciate that. If the committee doesn't have any questions, just have a couple more. And then I guess I will have just a couple of questions for the comptroller's office since they were gracious enough to attend. But we're going to get some feedback from Mr. Pruitt with regards to some of the points that he raised and in an effort to continue the dialogue and go from there. In terms of the contiguous land that you own, the additional 2,100 acres, how much of that is on the eastern side of the airport on the, on the 170 side?
The majority of it's on the western side.
Okay,
So we've got a very large spot. You have about close to 500 acres. That used to be the West Carlton area. That's on the other side of, the west side of 270, so that's a very large spot there. Then you've got some that is kind of at the northwestern tip of the airport, which would be, where the golf course is today.
Sure.
We don't actually own that. That's kind of surrounded by property that we do own. And then obviously a lot of what was on the northern edge, we don't own anymore.
gotcha. And like I say, so I appreciate you coming and answering the questions. It's just in the manner of trying to protect and see what the impact is. And so in having community outreach, it is important. And I'll make sure to take advantage of every opportunity to make sure that those that will be impacted in the county, that's been one of my biggest issues is that my family is from Kinloch. So in that, there's a legacy there, there's history there, and now it's not, so.
And we're trying to be a very good partner to all of our neighboring communities, so.
Right, it's just, it's, the scary thought is that when a private entity comes in,
I know.
they're potentially less accountable, depending on how we, write up the RFP and RFQs and all of that. They could be potentially less accountable than the city could be, because at least in the city, we know that there are still things that the city is going to need, and they can't just, discount St. Louis County so much. But with that, I'd like to thank you for your conversation. And with that, Mr. Pruitt, if you would come up and share what you could from at least your iPad, that would be greatly appreciated. Right over here. Yep. And did you get one from the director as well, Ms. Simmons? Thank you. And I'll probably just have maybe 3 questions for the comptroller's office, and it's just more so, about the bond process and such.
Mr. Chairman, I left my briefcase in the car.
Oh, well, if you would be, I could pull it up for you if you want to read from
No,
it.
that's okay. Had lunch with State Representative May and put my briefcase in the car.
Gotcha. You need Cameron to retrieve that?
No, I'm okay. I would say this, Adolphus Pruitt, President, St. Louis City, NAACP. I would make it short because I think the op-ed spoke for itself. I will say that I have had a number of conversations with the mayor on this particular issue. The NACP is comfortable that the mayor's office understands what our position is and what our concerns are as it relates to privatization. And we have no reason to think that those concerns are not genuine. Again, you know, for us, one of the biggest issues is going to be how if privatization happened, how are the funds that are generated out of it? One is that the funds are sufficient enough for moving ahead on the rationale of privatization. Because, you know, unfortunately, we've been hearing all sort of numbers. As a matter of fact, the last number we heard, I think somebody said if it was happened, and somebody was leased the airport, it could maybe throw off a little bit more than $200 million for the city of St. Louis. And that's, you know, when we look at the needs of the city and what that could do for its budget is equivalent to pissing in the ocean trying to cause a flood. It does not generate, I think, the windfall that's necessary. But if the numbers get higher, you know, our position is that, you know, how's the use of those funds codified to where those uses stay consistent over the years going forward, and we wrote in the American, and we still believe that it's going to take some sort of charter amendment to make sure something like that happens. Outside of that, all of the other issues that I know they talked about that are covered under the federal rigs, we're not satisfied that even with those rigs being in place in the existing airport, that we're hitting all of the benchmarks that we potentially could. So again, we were looking for, if any sort of privatization takes place, to sort of strengthen the requirements as relates to minority participation and get a little bit more creative on some stuff. I mean, one of the prime examples is the rental car industry. They get a pass. They get a pass on participation. They say they deserve a pass because the industry does not have enough minority players within it that could provide the goods and serve. In other words, they would say minorities own car manufacturing plants, and we buy our cars from the makers of automobiles. So therefore, such a big expenditure. How do we meet those goals and this and that? I just think that, as far as I'm concerned, is that the auto industry and all other industries can become extremely creative when they need to meet their business models, and when they want to meet their profit-making goals, when they want to do all other things that they do to stay in business. And I just think they can get creative when it comes to finding a way to diversify some of the way they spend their dollars, even if it means they need, you know, a good example is, we went into the hospitality industry, I guess, a couple of decades ago from a national basis, and the outcome of that was Marriott and a lot of other folks began to create minority franchisees in order to and put the dollars behind it in order to put them in the hotel business, because that was the only way they were going to be able to diversify the business. And so I think that the leasing companies can do the same, and there's just some others out there. But
Such as, if you could just name one other one. I'm just trying to, because at least with the car rental business, one thought that comes to mind being in the startup world is we've had a number of car sharing services that have popped up, and even if you didn't have an entity that owned, you know, a fleet of cars that they could rent, it seems like there could be space carved out for a minority-owned car sharing service, which provides other individuals that are either traveling from airport, you know, to airport to, you know, do something. I mean, it would be a means to getting in, and then maybe based off of the revenue from that, and being the one of the only, you could get a foothold in other airports, and that would allow them to grow into where they could buy, you know, the fleet, or, you know, buy some of the cars from the rental companies.
yes, but Mr. Chairman, I think the director would be in a better position to provide some ideal of what industries that the airport does business with that is woefully underperforming as relates to minority participation with a little bit more clarity than I could.
Sounds good.
And so, but I mean, you got the caterers to the airplanes, you got the folks who gas them up. I'm just saying that there are any number of, the best example is that, Commissioner Steelman, spoke before you earlier and indicated that, the Office of Administration and DED were collaborating to look at the state, how the state's money is being spent, and look at those areas that were woefully underrepresented with minority participation on diversity and securing contracts. And that collaboration is specifically to target those areas and to use those areas to provide a means for diversifying minority businesses by pushing them, providing incentives, and providing a little bit more pressure in those departments, in those areas, to ensure that they open the door and provide a mechanism for more minority participation in those particular fields and areas. That's all I'm saying, is that
I get it.
is that if it's no problem can exist that does not have a solution. It is finding it and having the wherewithal to find it, and creativity is what determines whether that solution is ultimately brought to the table and implemented. And I just think there are solutions for all of these problems. But again, in private industry, that is not their mission. That's not their business model, but it should be a part of their corporate responsibility and their mission statement. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, I get the chance to come back to talk about all of the other areas that you had testimony from today. There's a bunch of glowing, I won't say misrepresentations, but issues that we would love to be able to shine a little light on.
So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up here, and then we will provide that opportunity. We provide it at the end of each one, but that'll be likely in the next 10 minutes.
Sure.
So,
Great.
Thank you. With that, just two questions. I don't really think, I guess if the comptroller's office has something that they'd like to share about how they are moving forward, and anything that you could provide information with regard to, I guess, bonding and things of that nature, that would be appreciated. Not required, though. The two questions that I do have still, I guess, for the director is with regard to, I guess, control of the airport police. It stays with the city, but would the private entity or operator have the ability to potentially, I guess, not use the services of the airport police and go with a private company? And if the answer is yes, then that opens up a whole different door of questions. And the second question relates to, I guess we did talk about the regional authority in terms of the airport commission. I guess how much does the level of autonomy or power that body has over that changed, airport operator and relationship, how would that change?
Okay. To your first one, our police actually are city employees, but they are independent of the existing police force. They're airport police officers. So again, that would be something that you would have to put into the RFP. The firefighters are part of the city firefighters. So it's a little different scenario with the two of them. So I think it would depend how we write that in the RFP. Again, I think it's very important that the airport retain their own police officers and that not be an outside police force. But I think that's something that we look at going forward and how you put in the RFP.
Sure.
As far as the second question, I got to remember what it was.
The regional authority.
Oh, the regional authority. So the airport commission today, there are very specific guidelines as to what they have authority over and what we still have to legislate beyond that. So if we have an ordinance that has to be created as a result of something, that obviously today still goes through the city legislative process after the airport commission approves it. If we have a contract that's longer than 3 years, so if I have a particular contract that's a 5-year contract, not only does the airport commission have to approve that, but E&A and then the Board of Aldermen approve that. So some things there is autonomy on, Most things still run through the city process, the legislative process, whether it be through E&A or whether it be through E&A and the full Board of Aldermen. If you have an airport operator, at least it's my understanding, you would not have the airport commission. You wouldn't have that entity. Now, that being said, I think there does have to be some oversight, and I think that's something that, again, the mayor and anybody on the team would be persistent that there has to be an oversight committee that oversees this operator to ensure that, things are happening that the city and the region want.
Sure. So it's this hearing and you all attending is timely, and that's why I put airport privatization and oversight, assuming that it could possibly go away, but we'd at least still need at least state oversight or something to that effect. How that happens is a different question. We can look into that. I guess one question. So everything goes through the city, and it's the owner.
Mm-hmm.
You're the operator in the enterprise fund.
Well, I'm a city employee. I'm an appointee of the mayor.
Okay, well, you are, the airport is in a separate fund. What duties does it have to the county? I know it's an unincorporated St. Louis County.
Right.
What duties or oversight or does it have to the county?
Well,
Or
there's
what can the county do and not do, I guess, with regard to you being in the county?
Right. There's a couple of things. All of our permits for construction are county permits. They're not city permits. So if we're building anything, if we're rehabbing anything, if a tenant's coming in and doing all of those permits go through the county. Obviously, on the commission, there are board appointees that are appointed by the county executive. And so those members are there to speak for the county in their voice. The taxes are also paid into the county. Those taxes do not go into the city. So tenants that we have at the airport who pay taxes, that goes into a county fund, not into the city fund. So there is, we have a very good relationship with the county. The commission, which is made up of, I said we have a representative from St. Charles County, one from St. Clair, and then we have 5 from the county of St. Louis.
How many from the city?
The city has 6 appointees on it, and then
So
you have
6
by
in-
default, the comptroller and the president of the Board of Aldermen are also on that by default.
Okay.
So, and then I chair the committee as via the charter today. But, so we have a very close relationship with the county. If we're looking, say, for liquor license, if our tenants are, not we, the airport, but if they're liquor license, those all come through the county. So there is a very close relationship today with the county.
Good deal.
One point I want to make, and it's a very thoughtful question, is what are we going to do, in terms of oversight? And we're starting to think very thoughtfully about that. I mean, you become a landlord and you have a tenant, so the tenant would be the operator. We're not just going to let them do whatever they want. There'll be some very detailed standards, and I anticipate there will be continuing employees of the city of St. Louis that the full-time job will be to make sure that the operating standards are met.
Sure.
And how do we, because there'll be things that are probably iterative and negotiated as, things move on, and there'll be oversight from the city of St. Louis, and potentially, maybe there'll be a regional input board. I mean, I don't think we've determined that, but I think those are the kinds of things that would cover community engagement with the residents and, like I said, the flying public and the businesses are here that are supporting the airport. So I think there'll be some very thoughtful places for, on an ongoing basis.
Sure.
To make sure that they're meeting their standards and requirements.
Definitely, and that was the purpose of the hearing, just to come up with some different things that at least we see from the state's perspective, and to make sure that we did put them out at least into the public body, so that we could provide the opportunity to be thoughtful and considerate, because there's at least one opportunity that we missed, and unfortunately, it's time and time again, and it's not the city of St. Louis, because the state was involved with the effort to keep the Rams. We didn't direct the Regional Sports Authority to follow what was already in place. And in this instance, we had an opportunity to be intentional, and we didn't. But we'll just make sure that we do more by way of hearings and questions and urban issues to ensure that if nobody else is looking, that we're looking to make sure we come out with the best product that'll help the community and ultimately put us in a position to succeed with everyone at the table.